We are joined for AILA's October Interview of the Month by Margaret Stock on Skype from Anchorage, Alaska, to discuss her immigration law efforts on behalf of veterans and their families that led to her being named one of the 2013 MacArthur Foundation's Fellows.
The MacArthur Foundation cited 4 things that I've done in granting me the award. The first thing they cited was my theoretical work on the connection between immigration law and national security. And there they were looking at papers that I've written and speeches that I've given on the intersection between immigration and national security. Mainly, I've tried to make the point, and this is a simplified version, of course, but I've tried to make the point that it's not all about keeping people out of the country. It's also about letting the right people into the country to make us stronger. So to have national security, we have to think about immigration in a positive way because immigration contributes to our national security. So that was the theoretical piece of the reasoning behind why I got the award. And then there were 3 practical programs that they cited that are reasons why I got the award. And the first one was the MAVNI program, Military Accessions Vital to the National Interest. And this is something I think people in AILA are familiar with because AILA helped to get the word out about MAVNI when it first started. MAVNI grew out of a PowerPoint briefing that I gave to the Secretary of the Army in the fall of 2007. And I gave the Secretary a PowerPoint briefing on the fact that there were lots of people in the country legally who didn't have green cards and whom the military was not recruiting, but who were anxious to join the military and would make excellent recruits. And an example would be a J1 doctor. The Veterans Administration had lots of J1 doctors working for them. And these J1 doctors couldn't get green cards because a lot of them were from countries that were on lengthy waiting lists. They also had an Immigration and Nationality Act Section 212E problem. So many of them were being told they had to go back home for 2 years before they could get a green card, or they were going to have to seek a waiver of the inadmissibility ground under Section 212E. And immigration lawyers know that's difficult and complicated and very expensive to get a waiver. So these doctors weren't able to get green cards, so they couldn't join the military, even though they were treating military members and they were working at the Veterans Administration. And they were one of the big groups that benefited from the MAVNI program. So the MAVNI program was something that I came up with, although I can't say I thought of it totally on my own. I had a number of AILA lawyers who were older over the years had told me, hey, you know, during the Vietnam War, they were naturalizing everyone who joined the military. And a lot of AILA lawyers gave me ideas that caused me to think this was a good thing to brief to the Secretary of the Army. So it wasn't totally something I came up with out of the blue. You know, it was based on my background in AILA and talking to other AILA lawyers about what had happened in the past that caused me to think this was a good idea that would work. So in any event, I briefed the Secretary of the Army in the fall of 2007 at a military conference, and he really liked the idea because we ran the numbers and we found that there were literally millions of people in the United States legally who couldn't get green cards, but who were very high quality folks. And immigration lawyers will know this because they're the H-1B visa holders, the F-1 students, the E-2 treaty traders and treaty investors, the whole alphabet soup, starting with, you know, the letter E, I guess, you know, the E's, the F's, the H's, the I's, the J's, the K's, the L's, the M's, so forth. So MAVNI was a program to allow folks who had been in lawful status for at least 2 years to join the military. And instead of getting green cards, they would get U.S. citizenship. So they would skip the green card process. And that's important to know because if you're a J1 doctor, getting a green card is a big problem. It's hard to get one. But 212E does not apply to people who are applying for citizenship. So they were able to bypass the lengthy and difficult green card process and go straight to American citizenship by joining the military. So that was the first program the MacArthur Foundation people cited. And I was the person who came up with that idea, and then I was also the Army's main project officer for the MAVNI program for a couple of years. The second program they looked at was the AILA MAP program, the American Immigration Lawyers Association Military Assistance Program. And I think AILA members are very familiar with this. This was another program that started in 2007, right about the same time I was working on MAVNI. It was a program that developed after I called Chuck Cook, who was then the president of AILA. And at the time, I was being inundated with questions from people in the military relating to immigration. And I was also being inundated with questions from AILA members about military issues. And I was just overwhelmed. I had too many people calling me and emailing me. I was getting phone calls at home in the middle of the night from frantic military members who had spouses and children and parents with immigration problems. And I had so many people calling me, I just couldn't handle it. I couldn't answer all the questions. So I called Chuck up and I said, hey, Chuck, how about getting AILA to start a pro bono program, because I could use some help from my fellow AILA members. And the organization's trying to develop new pro bono efforts, and this one looks like something that might appeal to people. And Chuck, to his credit, turned right around and called AILA National and asked people at AILA National to do it. And he got Susan Timmons involved in the effort. And eventually we developed a formal program with a website and with a listserv, forms and so forth. And we had set up a matrix to track all the people who are calling looking for help. We tried to match them with AILA volunteers who were willing to help them on their cases pro bono. We got an outpouring of support from the AILA membership. And literally a few hundred lawyers signed up to volunteer to help out with people's cases. In the early days, I was one of the ones who would call people. So I would call a fellow AILA lawyer on the phone and I'd say, hey, we've got this pro bono case. Can you help out? You know, I've screened the call and this is what this person needs to have done. And my fellow AILA members were very anxious to volunteer. They were extremely helpful. So that was a second program the MacArthur folks cited. But of course, it's a program that depended on the efforts of hundreds of people in AILA to make it a success. So I think I'm getting the credit for it, but a lot of other people played a role. And then the last program that they cited is something called Basic Training Naturalization. And again, this was something I came up with, but it was the idea that I got from people in AILA. And particularly, there was an older AILA member who had served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. And he told me that when he was serving in the Vietnam War era, he went to basic training and there were all these immigrants serving in the military with him. And they were all getting naturalized at basic training. So before they went overseas to fight for Uncle Sam, they were getting their citizenship. And he remembered this from his basic training when he was in basic training for the Army. So one of the things that had bugged me after 9/11, or bothered me, I guess, was that the military was taking a very long time to get people their citizenship. And they were working with Homeland Security. At first, they were working with INS. It was the old INS at first. And then they were working with Homeland Security. But the logistical problems were driving everyone crazy. Nobody was getting their citizenship at basic training. They were getting it a year or 2 years or 3 years or more years later after they joined the military. And there was no reason why it was taking so long other than logistical problems. You might have heard about the soldier who was killed in Iraq, Kendall Frederick. They passed a bill called the Kendall Frederick Act later on. He was killed trying to go get his fingerprints taken for his naturalization application. He was in a convoy and the insurgents attacked the convoy and he ended up dying on the way to get his fingerprints taken. So there were all kinds of problems with the military naturalization process stemming from the fact that there was a war going on and people were deployed all around the world. People weren't being allowed to process their applications early. There was no legal reason for that. It was just a bureaucratic one. And Homeland Security had to chase them all around the world. So Homeland Security was under fire for not processing the cases fast enough. There were congressional hearings about it. There was a bill passed to try to speed things up. But unfortunately, nobody was dealing with the practical issue, which was simply that getting the agency together with the soldier was very, very difficult. And in prior wars, because of my experience talking to older AILA lawyers, such as the one I mentioned, I had heard that they solved this problem by simply naturalizing everybody at basic training. And they would wait till they graduated and then they would make them citizens right away. And so I went to an official at Homeland Security and proposed this, and they told me that they would love to do this, but they hadn't been able to get the military to cooperate. So they had been proposing this apparently on their own, but had gotten nowhere with the military officials. So at the time, I happened to be working for the general who was in charge of all the Army basic training posts. And I went to him and I briefed the issue to him and explained that if they started basic training naturalizations again, it would save the government a lot of money, it would reduce all the problems, it would improve morale, And most of all, it would get rid of all the legal problems that result when you have non-citizens fighting in a foreign country for the United States, because everyone would be a citizen. If it worked perfectly, everyone fighting for the United States overseas would be an American citizen. So the legal problems would be dramatically reduced if we did this. And along with saving the government hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally, from flying Homeland Security officials to foreign countries to do the naturalizations. So the general thought it was a great idea, and he just turned around and ordered all the Army basic training posts to cooperate with USCIS to set up basic training naturalizations. And it happened really fast. It was amazing to me because literally I had a conversation with a DHS official. I turned around, I made some phone calls and emails, and the whole thing just started happening right away. There was a lot of staff work involved, but it was very quick and by bureaucratic standards extremely fast. The conversation I had with the Homeland Security official was in April 2009, and by August 2009, just a few months later, the Army had the program set up on every single Army basic training post in America, and there were 5 of them. And you can imagine it's a lot easier for USCIS to cope with naturalizing people at 5 fixed locations rather than chasing them all around the world in more than 120 countries. And of course, when you're at basic training, you're a captive audience. So we worked out a system where the soldiers would report for basic training, they'd submit their applications, USCIS would do the background checks while they were at basic training, they would bring them in and have them tested. And then when it was clear they were going to graduate from basic training, they would make them citizens. And often the naturalization ceremony would be part of basic training graduation, which made it much more meaningful. And I think this is another point that didn't really come out in the MacArthur Foundation materials, but it's something AILA members can appreciate. When USCIS had been naturalizing these military members overseas, a lot of times it was very rushed. You know, they would fly over there, they would interview people very quickly, they'd tell them to raise their right hand, and they didn't always get a big ceremony. But basic training graduation for most members of the military is a very emotional event, and getting your citizenship in a wonderful patriotic ceremony along with your graduation from basic training makes the grant of citizenship so much more meaningful to most people. Their friends are there, their families are there, they're sharing this very proud moment with everyone else. They're at an emotional high because they've just graduated from a very difficult course. You know, basic training is not easy. And so this basic training naturalization actually became a more meaningful naturalization ceremony for a lot of these folks than it would have been otherwise. And for that, I'm quite proud of that achievement. And I was also quite amazed at how fast everyone moved once we got the idea going. And then, of course, Janet Napolitano has given speeches where she points to this as a very big achievement of her administration of USCIS, that they managed to get basic training naturalization through. It's now available for all the services except the Coast Guard. So anyone who joins the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine Corps as a non-citizen is now eligible for basic training naturalization. Now, once in a while they miss somebody, but they catch most people these days, and it is available. So if you have AILA members listening out there and they have clients who are joining the military who are non-citizens, they should prep their citizenship package and send it off with them to basic training and then have them ask about it when they report for basic training. That was the last program that the MacArthur folks cited. So overall, there were 4 things they were looking at. One was the theoretical work, and then the 3 practical programs that I was involved in. I never would have been getting this singular honor if it were not for all the members of AILA who helped me out over the years. And it would take an hour for me to list all the people from AILA who've helped me, but just to briefly thank everyone. The AILA MAP volunteers have been wonderful. All the people in AILA who mentored me over the years and taught me things and told me stories about how it used to be. And of course, the presidents of AILA who have supported the American Immigration Lawyers Association Military Assistance Program. They continue to support it today. And the staff at AILA National who helped out a lot with all of these issues.